and no time in which we do not need your help. Grant us such wisdom of mind, such strength of will, such devotion of heart, that may seek to do things that please you, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Say the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. Minutes for the meeting held on Tuesday, October 5th, 2021 to be confirmed.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed.
Announcements by Your Honor, the Speaker. Messages from Her Excellency, the Governor General. Petitions, papers, government notices, private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills, statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motion for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honorable Leader, Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42, subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government business is the order of the day.
Order number 6, sir. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the second reading of the Prevention of Corruption Bill 2021.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, there have been occasions during the life of this particular Parliament that, in my respectful opinion, represent changes, tremendous changes in the way in which we go about things. Last week, we began the process of changing our constitutional relationship with the monarchy. This week, we come to address an issue that, while it has far-reaching consequences externally, it is more particularly addressing, in a sense, who we are as a people and what we think of ourselves. It isn't often that I would begin a presentation by reflecting on words of the last Prime Minister, but on an occasion when the last Prime Minister spoke about the issue of corruption, he referred to the 1929 statute. And his first 10 or 12 words are what I think could begin to set the context for our discussion today. And those words is a phrase: when Barbados was in the hands of merchants and planters in 1929, a bill was passed in Parliament, which is still the law of Barbados. When Barbados was in the hands of merchants and planters in 1929. And, sir, the historical context of corruption and corruption legislation has hung around our neck like the proverbial albatross. And, sir, if you look at the piece of legislation that was passed in 1929 and ask yourselves, who was this legislation passed for? You would immediately say, well, not for people of our color. Not back in 1929. In 1929, sir, the majority black population of Barbados had virtually nothing. They were not engaged in any serious degree in commerce. I admit there were certainly one or two, but we know the planter class and the merchant class of that era. This legislation that is still on our books was passed at a time and became law at a time that is very, very different to today. In 1929, sir, the concept of gentlemen and gentlemen's clubs and things of that sort were very prevalent. A lot of things were done by handshake and things of that sort. When you think about corruption back in those days, the dollar value, though important then, makes no sense in today's environment. In fact, sir, if you look at the 1929 legislation, it refers to acts of corruption as misdemeanors. And that alone should tell you how people saw these things now almost 100 years ago. In fact, 8 years short of a century. Because for the planter class and merchant class of those days, those arrangements were but misdemeanors. And that's why I say it continues to hang as an albatross around our neck, because there are still a lot of people who seem to accept that those things are part and parcel, or should be part and parcel, of daily life, sir. And so I regret to say that in recent times, there are people, or a set of Barbadians have emerged, who seem to think it is almost natural and normal for you to pay somebody to get what you want. A license, a permit, a permission, something. You know, it seems as though it is almost as if we don't feel that these things belong to us as of right, and that we need somebody to do us a favor. And you know, sir, perhaps it starts small, if such a thing could be considered to be starting small. Because I am aware, I've had conversations with people who say, man, you can't get anybody a little something so it could get do faster. And that tells a tale, sir. Because there are people like you and me and like everybody else who seem to feel that in order to get something do faster, not in order to get it do, you know, because they accept almost the certainty that it will be done, But they begin with the premise that it can take long. It can take long to get a planning permission. It can take long to get a liquor license. It can take long to do anything at all relating to government. And therefore, they wonder, can I give somebody a little something to get it done a little faster? And then there are those people who believe that what they want, they're not sure they can get. So the next question is, can I give somebody something to make sure I get through? Now, sir, I don't think that Barbadians over the years recognize how those things were eroding the very foundations of our society, sir. And they erode the foundations of our society because it means that the person who has will get through faster than the person who has to wait. It means that the person who has can get what he or she wants, while the person who is not in a position to pay a little something ends up being left to the fates and fortunes. It eroded our society, sir, and our governance because it meant that decisions might not be made on a rational basis, but purely on a basis for self-gain. Mr. Speaker, the problem with this is that when it becomes so pervasive, it almost seems to be acceptable. And in our manifesto, Mr. Speaker, we said that corruption was a stain on our society and that it was our pledge to root it out. Mm-hmm. Now, sir, we spoke extensively in the last election campaign about dealing with the issue of corruption. And I know, no point hiding from it, that a large number of Barbadians expected and still expect that they would get their pound of flesh. And they expected then, and they still expect, that individuals will be dragged before the courts. And they have expressed to me and to others a disappointment in this administration not having been able to achieve that particular aim within the time that has passed so far. Mr. Speaker, we are the government. And the buck stops here. I want to assure Barbadians that notwithstanding that they may not have seen any charges brought before or brought against anybody, please be aware that that process is continuing. Right. There are a number of investigations of corruption that have taken place in Barbados since we became the government. And they continue. We brought in a team of high-powered specialists, very well regarded in the field, coming from as far as Australia, Turks and Caicos, and other places, in 2019 to begin the process of examining the state of affairs at a number of our statutory bodies. And I've spoken about it in Parliament before. They gave a report to the government with recommendations. They set out a plan, a work plan to go forward, and it was presented to us in February of 2020 last year. And plans were afoot for them to come back to Barbados in 2020 and go into a deeper level of forensic analysis. we shut down the country at the end of March. All of the territories that these various specialists would have come from were also shut down. Australia was shut down tighter than a drum. And we had some considerable difficulties getting a reconstituted team. We had considerable difficulties planning for these individuals to return to Barbados to do the work. And then, of course, sir, there's the practical matter of government resources, because these specialists do not come cheap. Now, sir, I have told this chamber that the Trinidad and Tobago government, the current regime, in their first term, they brought in 30 specialists and made them all police constables and stationed them to work out of the Parliament building for the purpose of doing nothing but investigating corruption. They have only been able to bring one charge so far. So let us begin by looking at some fundamentals, sir. Acts of corruption are easily alleged, difficult to prove. Easily alleged, but difficult to prove. And it bears repeating. Since we became government, a lot of the people who had come to us and told us that they paid this body bribes and they gave this body $40,000 and they gave this body $120,000 and on and on and on, sir. When we go back to them and say, let me talk, we want to put this man in the hands of the police, they wither, sir, like a spinach leaf in the hot sun. Yep. And the excuses come out. Oh, I forgot to explain where you get the money from. Oh, I don't want nobody to know that I was involved in that and so. Oh, I still got to do business here and my children still go in school with so and so, and I don't want to create that problem for myself and my family. A level of cowardice, sir, a level of cowardice came to the fore, and these people withered. And therefore, absent people coming and giving testimony, you need to take a different approach to how you investigate. You have to now begin to investigate accounts, how the money moves, where it moves to. And our reality is that we don't have in Barbados the level of specialization that is able to address those issues. We are building it, but we don't have it. The areas in which we are focusing our efforts are not things to be discussed on the floor of Parliament. But let me say that our efforts in investigating acts of corruption continue. Investigations are held, are done, are conducted, but they're not conducted in public glare. They are painstaking, they take time, they take precision. I give you the assurance, Mr. Speaker, that that work continues. But there's another element which is relevant, and that is how we deal with the problem going forward. And that's why we're here today. We are here today, Mr. Speaker, to pass a bill. As I said, it is ironically just 8 years short of 100 years. 8 years from now would have been the 100th anniversary of our prevention of corruption legislation. We're catching it in time, sir. And this new bill, based on a piece of legislation in one of our OECS sister states, Grenada to be precise, is a modern piece of legislation which will form the centerpiece of a whole suite of corruption legislation. So when you ask how are we dealing with the issue, the first thing that we're doing, we're investigating, yes, but that's investigation for past transgressions. But the first thing we're doing, sir, is to put a new piece of legislation on the table. Now let me say, Mr. Speaker, that there was a prevention of corruption bill before Parliament. It was on our order paper in 2020. I think it got on our order paper in January of 2020. And the plan was to completely work on the Integrity in Public Life bill, and then immediately after pass the Prevention of Corruption bill. Well, we all know, sir, that the Integrity in Public Life bill was defeated in the other place, and then Parliament was immediately prorogued. So this particular piece of legislation, the Prevention of Corruption Act, died with the last sitting of Parliament. We took the opportunity, in as much as we had to bring it back to Parliament, to do a few additional things to it, to help to further strengthen it, and to help to give better investigative powers to the entities who are going to be doing the investigation. And I'll go through the bill very shortly, sir. But the point I'm making is that what is here today, it isn't as if we didn't bring it to the chamber earlier. We brought it to the chamber, I believe, in January of 2020. Mere 18 months after we won the election, just about 18 months after we won the election in 2018. Now, I mentioned the word sweet. It is clear, and it has always been clear, that a single piece of legislation is not going to be adequate. It's not going to be adequate, sir, to deal with issues of corruption. And, Mr. Speaker, let me say that throughout this process, we have been guided in large measure by the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, the UN Convention that was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations 31st October 2003. That convention, sir, is the first truly global effort at dealing with the issue of corruption in states. And I would like to thank a former member of this chamber, Sir Louis Tull, who, as Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary, helped Barbados and represented Barbados specifically in the negotiation of the text of this UN convention. And since then, a lot of work has been done on it. We've been guided by the Commonwealth, that has done a tremendous amount of work on that particular convention, and has published an excellent treatise called Commonwealth Strategies to Combat Corruption. And one of the things that this convention asks states to commit to is not just passing legislation, but establishing a specific body for the purpose of dealing with corruption issues. And if you will cast your mind back, sir, to not long ago, this chamber passed a statute establishing an anti-corruption agency, an agency for the specific purpose of dealing with corruption. When we talked about it, people were saying, man, they're just taking away work from the police and all kinds of things like that. Nothing of the sort. It is internationally recognized that in order to deal with issues of corruption in a rational manner and in an almost precise manner, that it has to have its own agency, somebody who comes to work every day to do nothing but that. Now, sir, let us be practical. The Royal Barbados Police Force has a financial Investigations Unit. It's a unit that investigates financial crime, sir. But it is not a big unit. It's a specialized unit, but it is not a big unit. And all financial crimes in Barbados will make their way to that unit. And therefore, that unit will be dealing with fraud, money laundering, a whole host of issues on a day-to-day basis. But the point is that as a small unit within the Royal Barbados Police Force, it cannot dedicate all of the time of its personnel purely to investigating corruption matters. And we simply don't have enough people. We don't have the people to add to that unit. That's our reality. We may not like it, but that is our reality. We're strengthening that financial investigations unit, but part of our challenge is that when we want to hire, when we want to bring in an accountant to do forensic analysis and so on, that person ain't want to be a policeman. So we have challenges getting that unit outfitted in terms of the skills that we want. Yes, we can buy some in, but that creates other difficulties. So we have already established a body whose specific purpose it is to investigate acts of corruption. And if you cast your mind back to that statute, sir, the only people in Barbados who have better protection in terms of security of tenure would be the DPP, the judges, and the Auditor General. The individual who is appointed to be the Director General of that entity is his appointment is dealt with specifically and his removal from office. So it is not, you can't say that he will be a creature of any political body of the day. So, sir, let me carry you back through this. It's not just the issue of setting up a new piece of legislation, bringing a new piece of legislation to the books. We're also required to set up a specific agency, and that box has already been checked. Added to that, sir, will be the Integrity in Public Life Bill, and I can say to the Chamber that I expect to be able to lay that new bill in this chamber before the end of October. We, sir, it is unfortunate that it got defeated in the Senate, in the other place, but that is what it is. We've gone back to the drawing board, and the two areas that the members of the other place specifically said they wanted addressed, one area was to do with judges, and the other one slipped some mind specifically, but we've gone now and we've addressed those issues, and that bill will be laid in Parliament to come back to this House. I pray for its passage in the Senate when it gets to them, sir. In addition to that, we recognize that we have to afford protection to the so-called whistleblower. The individual who, in good faith, says, I have seen something and I can't keep it to myself. I really feel that I should draw this to the attention of someone so that they know what is happening. You see, sir, it isn't everybody who wants to be a whistleblower. A lot of people want to be gossipers. They want to come and whisper in your ears. And as I said, when you look wrong and say, but come, they disappear. They wither, sir, like the spinach leaf in the hot sun. But there are individuals who, if given adequate statutory protection, we believe that they would be comfortable enough in their minds to be able to come forward, knowing that they can't be victimized, knowing that they can't be unfaired, because there's a statute to protect them. And that bill, sir, I expect also to bring to this chamber before the end of the month. And then finally, we have a piece of legislation which is on the order paper, which is a remediation agreement, a remediation bill. which will attempt to give us a number of options in terms of dealing with entities who might be found guilty, in fact, not just of corruption, but in terms of a whole raft of other things that may arise. So we talk about a suite of legislation. I remind you then, sir, that it isn't a single piece of legislation that will equip our legislative arsenal. It will be a whole set of pieces, all of which combined puts Barbados in a good position going forward, puts Barbados in a position where we will have a credible response to acts of corruption. Now, Mr. Speaker, a lot of what we have to deal with, though, will not just be statutory. It will have to be how governance operates. I remember when we were last in government, the Town Planning Department had a charter which said, we will grant all planning permissions within 6 months. It was a guarantee by a state entity which said to citizens, in 6 months and no more, you will have your planning permission. Now that, of course, doesn't take into account things like environmental impact assessments. Those are obviously planning applications of a whole different kind. But, sir, when we approach governance in the way of offering commitments to citizens, then citizens will begin to understand that the offerings of the government are theirs as of right, and they don't have to pay anybody for it. And so another part of what we've done has been to put a whole, and I'll leave it for the Ministry of Finance to speak about it, to put a whole set of new governance relationships in place dealing with how government spends its money. Now, I will say to you, sir, if there's one thing this administration has had as its mantra every single day, has been transparency, transparency, transparency. Now, Mr. Speaker, when you come to government, a lot of people come and say, we feel we can do this, we feel we can do that. We want an opportunity to do this and the other. Something called unsolicited proposals. Everybody has an idea. It is government's duty to listen to the ideas of its people, to see how they can work, but to do it in such a way that everybody has an equal opportunity. And so, sir, in instances where we have had proposals put to us, we've gone back out and said, you know, thank you, this is very kind of you, but we feel that as a government, we can't only allow you to access this opportunity, we have to allow other people. And so in the area of housing, the ministry has requested proposals. In the media, sir. But I remember being in the Public Accounts Committee, looking at the last administration's record on housing, and looking at the number of contracts that were awarded for housing by the cabinet, not even by the National Housing Corporation, by the cabinet, to various businesses involved in construction in Barbados, and not an ad was ever found to have been published in the papers. Not an ad. We have worked on the Hope Direct project. Every single body was invited by public advertisement to participate. No deals made. Put your proposal in and it will be considered. In relation to the new rollout of the trash bins, another public invitation. Every single element of what we've done, we have gone to the public and said to Barbadians, come and put your proposal and we will consider it. you see, sir, transparency is what helps to give confidence in what a government does. And when people have confidence in what a government does, then the specter of corruption does not so easily rear its head. But, Mr. Speaker, we have to acknowledge that it will take time to rebuild the confidence of Barbadians in our structures. I have walked many streets in this country, and, I feel bad when people say, my all is the same thing. I feel bad. Because, there's a perception that that as long as you are a politician, you are dishonest. As long as you're a politician, you are in it only for what you can get. As long, sir, we don't often talk about things that we have to do. Two of the people in this chamber were at work dealing with constituencies and people's issues 11 o'clock last night. Nobody talks about those kinds of sacrifices. They feel that you are a parliamentarian or that you're a cabinet minister and you line your pockets. Man, that is very far from the case, because I look around at my colleagues and I know that almost a man, we're all worse off financially because we have chosen to come and serve the people's interests. And we will leave Parliament being worse off financially. And that has to be a badge of honor. In another place, I used to change suits regularly. I used to, in another profession, sir, I used to feel I was well dressed. Now I have to start trotting back out the respected blue blazer because the suit's looking a little bit worn. And so, sir, when people look at me and you and others of us and feel that we are in this somehow to get rich, I don't know how to get there. Because there's only one way to get rich as a politician, and that is to be dishonest. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. And I look to my left, I look to my right, I look behind me, I look in front of me, sir. And from all that I have seen in my colleagues, they represent a breed of politicians who want to have nothing to do with that old jaded perception of who we are. But we accept the burden. We accept that is how people see us. But all that we ask is that at the end of our tenure, look again. At the end of our tenure, look again to see what we're driving, what we're wearing, where we're living, how we're living, and whether we've given our best and taken little or nothing from the people we serve. So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, perhaps I've labored too long with those introductory remarks. Today represents a change, because we finally will have on our law books a piece of legislation that is able to deal with the issue of corruption. And let me remind the chamber that an act of corruption, the maximum fine would have been $2,400 if a person is charged with corruption under the law as it is today. If tried in the magistrate's court, the maximum fine would have been $240 and a term of imprisonment of up to 4 months. That, sir, is not a deterrent. 10 years before World War II, when the planters and merchants passed this act, There were no contracts for tens of millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars. Yes, the relative value of money would have meant, of course, that the dollar figures in those days would have been different. The relative importance and relative value might be closer, but we have kept anachronistic fines on our law books for almost 100 years, and not just in this area, in others. But the time has come for us to grapple with this issue and to deal with it frontally. And so our new piece of legislation will have far, far higher fines than currently exist. And I can share the level of the fines that we're looking at, in this. We're looking at fines on summary convictions in the magistrate's court of $500,000 or imprisonment for 10 years or both. On conviction in the High Court, fines of up to $1.5 million or to imprisonment for 15 years or both, sir. So we are looking seriously at the level of penalties and to make sure that the potential penalties that can be imposed on an individual found guilty of corruption are a true deterrent. Now let me say, Mr. Speaker, and you know it only too well, nobody in this chamber decides what fine will be imposed on a person when they get before the law courts. I have often spoken about the doctrine of separation of powers. That is for the judge to determine. And equally, constitutionally, we cannot say a person found guilty of an act of corruption must be fined $1.5 million. That removes the discretion of the judge. And that would mean that Parliament would be supplanting the role of the judiciary and is therefore unconstitutional. Am I right, Mr. Speaker? Constitutional Law 201. But what we are providing here is a wider range of fines that are available for the judge to impose, or a greater range of imprisonment terms for a judge to impose. So a judge can impose anything up to $1.5 million in fines, anything up to 15 years in imprisonment. Those, sir, are true deterrents when you consider what corruption can take place today. I also want to say, sir, that part of the challenge that we recognize is the powers that are available on an investigation. And, sir, our overseas consultant said to us, you know, one of the difficulties that you will have is really how to get a proper investigation done. Because in an investigation, you have to be able to demand of individuals documents, records. And so in this bill, and I mentioned earlier that we took the opportunity to improve on the bill that we had before, there is a part, sir, which is specifically called investigations. Nothing like this is anywhere else in the OECS. And as I said, we drew a lot from the Grenada legislation, but we understood that we had to go further. And so there's a part which is headed investigations. And this part, sir, serves to give the investigating authority special tools to be able to get documentary evidence so that it can be analyzed and gone through and sifted through and poured over to see how money moves, where it moves to, how does it eventually get to where it needs to get. And there's also the opportunity for cooperating with entities outside of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, I talk about the suite again. I talk about the need to get things to dovetail, because in the bill, which in the act setting up the anti-corruption agency, that agency which will be investigating corruption has the powers to work with entities outside of Barbados. Something that we now make easy, sir. Mr. Speaker, in this bill, it also considers a variety of things which serve to protect the reputation of people. You see, it is very easy to go and say so-and-so do this or so-and-so do that, so-and-so take money and so on. But such conduct has to be discouraged if it is made in bad faith. And for the first time, sir, we have a clause which, and I'm looking at clause 20, and it bears some consideration. A person who knowingly makes a false allegation or maliciously provides false information related to an offense under Part 2 is guilty of an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $50,000 on summary conviction, or on conviction on indictment, a fine of $150,000. Sir, what we're trying to say is, if you want to come and tarnish somebody's name, provide false information, give malicious statements to people, to authorities alleging acts of corruption, then you, sir, are committing an illegal act. Because we feel as a parliament that we also need to protect the reputation of individuals where that reputation is worthy of protection. So you can't just run around and say, so-and-so this, so-and-so that, he take money, she take money. No, sir, we're not accepting that. Anybody who does it maliciously or does it knowingly false is guilty of a criminal offense. Now, Mr. Speaker, I believe that in a modern Barbados, we have a lot to be proud of. For generations, we've always spoken about a level of public servant that has been the envy of the Caribbean. We've always talked about our structures of governance. But the truth is that a system must always be retooled from time to time to make it workable and to make it modern. I am satisfied, Mr. Speaker, that in this government we have tried to approach the issues of governance from many different angles and tried to improve them by measures that are reasonable and by measures that do not create an undue burden on the citizen. We need Barbadians to be confident about governance again. And I don't think that everybody thinks that we are dishonest. But because of a lot of things that have happened over the years, people don't have confidence in a lot of our leaders. And it's not just the political class, sir. They don't have a lot of confidence in the many decision makers that exist all around government, because they don't see how government works. And perhaps we need to begin to move in the direction of, and I know that the Minister of Home Affairs is working on that. We've committed to freedom of information legislation, because we need to be able to let people understand. I'm not going to mash on his territory, but people have to feel that this government is theirs, and that what we do in their name is no big secret. Mr. Speaker, I'm trying to get a house spots at Ginger Works. And you might wonder why I mention it, sir. Because every day when my constituents call me and ask me about the house spots, I go into graphic detail about what the Ministry of Housing is doing. Sir, it is not a house spot for the Ministry of Housing, it's a house spot for the people, and the people deserve to know. They deserve to know the processes that have to be gone through. They deserve to know the kinds of decisions that have to be made to benefit them. Because information, sir, is not something that belongs to the deciders. Information also belongs to the people who are affected by it. And I tell them, not just because they have a right to know, but because when they know, there's a better chance of them understanding that it is not so easy as saying, man, take a whole spot there, go and put one over there. There are things that have to be gone through. And those things, yes, accountability. They establish accountability. They know what they can expect. They know transparency. All of these things are part of good governance. And so, sir, I am never afraid when people ask me questions about the police force. There are, of course, certain things that I would never disclose to the public. But there are also certain things that I feel we should say to the public equally. We will never disclose matters in relation to the details of an investigation or law enforcement. But the fact is that people need to have an understanding of how we serve them. And the connection, sir, to the issue of corruption is real, because if they have a good understanding of how government works, what are the processes, is it transparent, then, Mr. Speaker, people will have confidence in the system. And then, once it is transparent, there will be little or no opportunity for individuals to abuse the power that they have. Mr. Speaker, I commend this piece of legislation. It comes with an explanatory note which goes through the various clauses. I will highlight, though, that it incorporates the United Nations Convention Against Corruption. Let me say that there have been some people who've been on the front lines of the corruption issue. I know that they support the efforts, but I've had to take licks from them I don't mind. And I speak of Integrity Barbados, sir. Integrity Barbados is a group of civic-minded individuals who have performed stellar service to Barbados and Barbadians as the watchdog of the people's trust. We don't always agree on everything, but I have to say, sir, that Integrity Barbados represents what a watchdog should be. And they have pilloried us publicly for not having passed the Integrity in Public Life legislation. They have pilloried us for not having brought the anti-corruption legislation. But I know, sir, that at every step of the way, this is not about criticizing a government. This is really about telling the government to get on with what it has to do. This particular bill went out to Integrity Barbados for their comment, and they responded by giving very clear comments on the bill. It isn't everything that they want that we will have been able to put in this bill, because some of the things that they have pointed out are for other pieces of legislation. Some of the things that they have queried have to do with drafting style, and of course we have our own style of drafting. The important thing is that the legislation works. We've also had consultations with the bar, and the bar has also very kindly made critical comments of the bill, and in every place that it was possible to do so, we have taken those comments into account, both of Integrity Barbados and of the Bar Association. I want to thank them, sir, for taking the time out to stand and look this over on behalf of the people of Barbados. Their only interest has been in improving the legislation, and they gave that kind of service to the people of Barbados graciously. And one of the things that Integrity Barbados was concerned about was us adopting the International Convention. And I am happy to say, sir, that this bill will, when passed in both chambers and assented to by Her Excellency, will see the UN Convention Against Corruption having the force of law in Barbados. And I say so mindful of the fact that many of the boxes that this convention has put there for us to fill in, almost, many of the areas that they have asked us to commit to, we have already done so. And I've done a little checklist, sir. And I believe that the chamber might find it useful if I pointed out a few of them. The convention requires, as I've mentioned before, that we establish a specific anti-corruption body. We've already done that. This convention, Article 8, requires that we address the issue of conduct for public officials. That's just another euphemism, another word, sir, for integrity legislation. And that, sir, we have a history there. It's coming again. Article 9 of the convention talks about public procurement and management of public finances. We have enacted a Public Finance Management Act of 2019 and will shortly bring to Parliament a new bill called the Public Procurement Bill. It is just about complete. Article 11, measures relating to the judiciary and prosecution services. Well, we ahead of them on that score, sir. Because one of the earliest acts of this government in securing transparency and how we do things was the establishment of a judicial appointment committee to take the appointment of judges out of the bald area where the Prime Minister has that power of appointment. We've also extended the age of retirement for the DPP and the Auditor General. So we have served to give those offices greater protection. Article 4, measures to prevent money laundering. Mr. Speaker, we have already passed a number of pieces of legislation. The Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act 2019. In 2011, the last administration passed the Money Laundering and Financing of Terrorism Prevention of Control Act. Since we've become the government, we passed a series of amendments to the Companies Act to disclose beneficial ownership of companies, which is key in fighting money laundering. We made that amendment in the last few months, sir. Article 15 of the convention, that we must provide for bribery of public officials. And we have that in clause 4 of our Prevention of Corruption Bill. Article 16, bribery of foreign officials. Again, the convention is saying that we must put legislative restrictions in place so as to eliminate bribery of foreign public officials, and that is provided for in clause 5 of this bill. Article 18, trading in influence, provided for in clause 7 of this bill. Article 21, bribery in the private sector. It happens, sir. You know, we focus so much on bribery in the public sector that we forget that a lot of that stuff happens in the private sector too. Nobody wants to talk about it, but it's there. The convention requires us to deal with it. We have addressed it in clause 11 of this bill. Article 23, laundering of proceeds of crime must be addressed. And as I said, we've already passed a number of pieces of legislation dealing with money laundering. And on and on and on and on. So while it is true, sir, that we've come to this dance a little late in terms of making the UN Convention the law of Barbados, I can say to this chamber proudly that most of the things that are required by the convention, we have already taken solid steps towards achieving. Many of them are already on the ground in our laws. So I have no difficulty in saying to the world, really, that Barbados adopts as part of its law the UN Convention on Corruption. It is at this point, it is the most thorough, the most comprehensive global treaty that deals with the issue of corruption, and it is commended very, very highly by the Commonwealth Secretariat. So, Mr. Speaker, there's work to be done. We are passing the law today. It will go to the Senate very shortly, and I expect that they will pass it. But once this is finished, we have to embrace the other pieces of legislation that are going to be required to complete the suite. And then that is when the hard work begins, Mr. Speaker. Because while we are investigating acts of corruption for the past, it is incumbent on us as a parliament to make sure that we root out opportunities for corruption going forward. Yes, people will always find a way to do it. But when it happens, we will have the tools to be able to deal with it, both in investigating it, in punishing it, and most importantly, sir, and I will end on this point. In 2019, we passed a piece of legislation called the Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act. And that piece of legislation is what will allow us to be able to force individuals who are guilty of acts of corruption to disgorge the profits, to disgorge the assets, to disgorge the money that they get from the corruption. So it's not just the case of, well, you serve 3 years in prison and you pay a fine. The Proceeds and Instrumentalities of Crime Act, a vital part of this particular suite, sir, is what will allow us to confiscate from you the cars and the big houses and the money in the bank account overseas, or the money in the bank account here, or the jewelry, whatever it is, whatever ill-gotten gains you got from acts of corruption. We now have a statutory basis for confiscating it from you and making sure that you are deprived of the benefits of your ill-conceived and dishonest actions. So, Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the Chamber. It has been a while in coming, but today, sir, marks the beginning of a new approach. And I ask that Barbadians, first of all, join us in this fight. If you see it, be man enough to come forward and say, it happened. Be man enough to come forward and say, I support law enforcement in dealing with this issue. But most of all, be decent enough to say, not me. I am not paying you for anything. Anything that is here provided by the government of Barbados is provided for all of its people. All of its people, as of right. You pay taxes, you don't have to pay bribes.
Yep.
Don't ever have to pay bribes, not to get a permit for nothing in this land. So let us begin with that reset of our mind. On our side, we commit to making sure that governance works better than it has in the past. We've completely changed how we deal with liquor licenses so that it's quick. People want to know that the government is responsive. We're changing how we deal with vending so that that is responsive. All government agencies. Immigration. Immigration, yes. Town planning. Government electrical engineering department. All of these entities that have to interface with people that have traditionally been in the scope or in the discussion when we talk about acts of corruption, permits for ZRs, all of these things. These are things that are yours as of right. So we are going to do our part, and we ask Barbadians to reset, because that is not who we are. I'm obliged to you.
I would like to move that it be.
Will this bill be read a second time?
Honorable Member for St. Michael West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Sitting here and listening to the Honorable Attorney General, a member of St. Joseph, making his presentation, not for the first time, I sense that I seem to be hearing a spokesperson for a government that is marking time.
marking time on very critically and urgent issues, the address of which is essential to the well-being of our country, the integrity of our institutions, the democracy that we are growing. How else, Mr. Speaker, can you explain, having railed against the last administration for its tardiness in addressing the broad issue of corruption and integrity in public life in Barbados, having made serious allegation of wrongdoing, serious and significant charges against members of the last administration? How do you explain, Mr. Speaker, that 3.5 years into the term, we're still talking about these things? We're still talking about these things in the future tense. How else, Mr. Speaker, can we explain a government that avows it is serious about integrity in public life legislation, allowing that bill to pass this House, to go to the other place, and not ensuring that it has the numbers present for the passage of that bill? How else do you explain that, Mr. Speaker? It is all right to stand and say it was stopped in the other place, it failed in the other place. There were objectors to some aspects of the way the bill presented itself in the other place. That is all right, and that is in place. That is normal. But why would a government, with the numbers available to itself, to ensure the passing of integrity in public life legislation in the other place, not have those numbers present? There's nobody on earth who can convince me, and I said it when we debated it here before it went to the Senate, and I'll repeat it, there's nobody who can convince me that this government was interested in seriously having the integrity in public life legislation fully passed through the Parliament of Barbados.
Mr. Speaker,
Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
the honourable member is misleading the chamber, and it really is I suppose, is expected. But he really needs to reflect on the composition of the Senate, sir. And he needs to remember that the Senate has 21 members, 2 appointed by the opposition, 7 by Her Excellency, the other 12 appointed by the government, one of whom is the President of the Senate and who does not have an original vote. There is no way, sir, that 11 members could result in a 2/3 majority in the chamber.
But he served on the committee.
There's no way.
Yeah.
There's no way, sir. And the members and his 2 senators opposed the bill. So to suggest to the public of Barbados that a government can guarantee itself of the support of the requisite number of independent senators and opposition senators is an absurdity. And you really ought to stop misleading the House.
Agreed.
Continue, Honourable.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member coming out of St. Joseph can call it an absurdity as often as he wishes and speak as loudly as he wishes. But I know the greater absurdity is this, that you need to ensure that a bill passes in the other house, having passed this house. You need to ensure that you can get a 2/3 majority down there. Therefore, you need the maximum vote available to you from your members, and you don't ensure that they are present, Mr. Speaker. You think that that is a government serious about having that bill pass the other place? If you recognize that the configuration of the other place is such that to get the 2/3 majority, you need some support from either independent senators or opposition senators, and you don't yourself make sure that your members are present and to vote, Mr. Speaker, wherein lies the absurdity? Wherein lies the absurdity, Mr. Speaker? I am not here to exercise control over adult, reasoned, educated, informed people who are making a serious contribution to debate in this country. We are not part of a culture that silences people. There are those on that side, Mr. Speaker, who are not free to speak. We want to get into that, we can get into that. I have never said to anyone in the other place, having been appointed to any degree by my instrumentality, that they have to agree with what I say. In fact, I told them the opposite. You are big people. We're here to debate in the interests of Barbados. If you differ from me on a view, say so. We have never reached a point of collusion on any matter with reference to public debate in Israel. But others on that side can't speak freely. Not a single one of them can get up and dare to differ from that which is printed on the choir sheet. If you want us to go down that road today, we can go down that road. But you want to tell me a government that is serious about having legislation passed in the other place, knowing that it requires a 2/3 majority up there, and knowing the configuration does not ensure that its members are present for that, but you can't be serious. I think therein is where the absurdity lies. And I'm not going to accuse anybody of being absurd, but I think in that is where the absurdity lies. So you're marking time. You're marking time because you created a certain expectation in this country that this government will change the nature of things and the culture of things in Barbados. And you're getting ready to face the people again and to ask of them their favor. And you have nothing hardly to show in 3.5 years. So you come here again and you take an additional step in marking time. Can't be serious. Cannot be serious. I heard nothing said by the Honorable Attorney General in his presentation that suggested to me he is of the view. And maybe this is another absurdity on my part. I heard nothing to suggest that he is to any degree of the view that what we have in Barbados is a culture of corruption, systemic corruption. We can't bring instruments here and talk glibly about stipulations that would address the ad hoc situation there, the intermittent issue there. We are, Mr. Speaker, you work in the law courts of Barbados. You're also a man of the people. Your focus has been on sociological development of this country. You've taught that. You understand what obtains around us. You are now in the practice of politics and have been for quite a while. You understand what faces us. This is not the occasional excursion into corruption by a few. In Barbados today, we are facing down a serious situation of corruption. It's systemic. It's part of the culture that operates the higher echelons of life in Barbados. It's endemic, Mr. Speaker. You can't come here and glibly sing some song that we have done this and we will do this and this will address this situation. What this Parliament needs to acknowledge, what the public of Barbados seems to perceive, and the Honourable Attorney General spoke to the issue of perception to a large degree. What this Parliament needs to understand, the average man perceives that the high levels of corruption as part of the culture, way of life in Barbados And it's not just related to persons operating in the political sphere. It is not that politicians are seen only in a negative light. People believe that what we have is a network, a swirl of corruption, a cesspool of corrupt practices in Barbados. And this Parliament, having excited the anticipation, the expectation of the people, needs to address that and stop marking time. That's a reality. If you want to call it an absurdity, do so. But that is a reality. Mr. Speaker, you know it perhaps. Now, the Honourable Member for Christchurch East may or may not know it. Certainly, the Honourable Member for St. Michael North West does not know it. The quite Honourable Member for St. John does not know it. Even my honourable friend out of St. George North does not know it. These two honourable colleagues who sit behind me very quietly may not know it. All of these people to whom I've referred, they have just arrived. The honourable member of St. George North, they have just arrived. They have now come into the vortex, the milieu of what happens around politics, political practice in Barbados. But there are those who have been here for a long time. And there's no way they cannot know. If I can know, so can they. That what we have to face down in Barbados is a culture of corruption that's endemic and that eats at the inners of this country. And if Parliament does not vigorously and quickly address and stop marking time, people of Barbados will lose this country. Now that can be cited as an absurdity if they wish. To me, that is a reality. Certain elements of the banking sector, Mr. Speaker, certain elements of those who are in the business of developing, the developers, the valuers, Mr. Speaker, we can go on, the construction magnates, some in the political circles, and some in official circles. It's a network, a cesspool. Of corruption obtaining. Attorney General, Honorable Attorney General is quite right. So many people are afraid to speak. So many people are afraid to say anything, even among those who occupy these precincts and who know without a doubt the practitioners of corruption in this country, the naughty hands that live in the dark behind the scenes, that live on the backs of the people of Barbados, that use the system for their corrupt, narrow benefit interests. We know it. Get up here and sound good and talk glib. Get up here and sound good and talk glib. But it's there when the other party is in office. We rail against that issue. When we come, it's all hunky-dory. We are doing our best. We are investigating, and we are bringing legislation, and we will address that 3.5 years. Now you have to face the people who voted for us. Hear me? On the basis of the fact that we promised to address these things, and we have failed to address them, and all kinds of excuses to which we make recourse. Couldn't get a team from here and couldn't get a team from there. And COVID shut this down and COVID shut that down. And this bill came here and it was defeated in the other place. All kinds of excuses. While the country dies. While the country is being raped, Mr. Speaker. While the average Barbadian out there constitutes a populace that fall prey and victim to these people's greed and dirtiness. That's where we are. You know the network, Mr. Speaker. You get information, perhaps even more than I do. But check it out. Those who are in banking, those who are in property development, those who are in construction, those who are into real estate and valuation, you know the fraternity of corruption, the cesspool of evil doers that exists out there. You know, they can do what they want to harm me, Mr. Speaker. Others have traveled this way before. They can prey on my family. That's a reality I have to square with. When I came here in the interest of serving my God and serving my people. Whatever sacrifice or pain I suffer along the way, it comes to me with my sense of calling. I can square that and face that down. If I come here and I join a band of merry men and simply going through the motions, wasting everybody's time, including my own, wasting your time, sir. This is an exercise in hypocrisy. If we don't recognize the magnitude of the problem, acknowledge it, square with it, confront it, treat it frontally, this is nothing more than an exercise in hypocrisy. Eventually, some legislation will go on the statute books. Eventually, we will get there. And if we can manage to survive this term and get another term politically and become the administration for another, if we can manage to do that, then this can be put on the back burner for a while. Mr. Speaker, there are those who are new to this place. There are those who are new to this place and who will not sense that. I've been around long enough to know the signs, to be able to read the signs and to see what is happening. I pray to God that those who are new will be awakened to this reality and make their moments in this place count. Well, they have their brief sojourn here. This is an exercise in cosmetic process. Paint a rosy picture. Construct a different public relations platform. Determine what the narrative is going to be. Sell it to the public through our friends in the media and else otherwise. That's what we do. That's what we do. And then we make recourse to our beds at night and sleep comfortably while the country is raped. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Member of St. Joseph raised the issue of perception with respect to how politicians are viewed. It's a reality that he cited. Mr. Speaker, do you know that there is a perception of corruption among the most recent, highly controversial and questionable action of the government with respect to the failed attempt to acquire vaccines for the people of Barbados? Mr. Speaker, in St. Michael Central, have you not heard this? Is this not the perception of the ground, on the ground? That is corruption attaching to that failed attempt to acquire vaccines for the people of Barbados? How is it, Mr. Speaker, that a government can get into arrangements to acquire vaccines through an intermediary company when it is known that the international pharmaceutical company does not so supply vaccines? How is it that a responsible government can find an intermediary agency allegedly to pursue the acquisition of vaccines in the interests of the well-being of the people of Barbados, while the same government should be aware that the international supply company does not so distribute the vaccines, Mr. Speaker. When people come face to face with a question like that, they wonder what form of corruption confronts us at the time. Why does this government that wants to demonstrate such soundness, prudence, transparency in the process of procurement, why does this government select a company that has no track record in acquiring health-related or medical supplies? As far as I'm aware, it doesn't. When people hear things like that, you get what essentially is a construction company operating under some radical designation. To be the main instrument through which you seek to acquire vaccines from an international company that does not so supply, and the company you select has no track record in so supplying, no track record in this area. And the Attorney General made it a very loud sounding avowal of his. He was loud when he said that his government now, having observed what happened with the past administration, is very careful as to its process of selection of those who supply it with services or products. Now, Mr. Speaker, I don't know what was the mechanism used for identifying and selecting a company with no track record in this area to acquire these vaccines for Barbados. So when the average fellow out there in St. Michael West gets to realize that this company doesn't have a track record, and when he becomes aware that he is not being informed that advises what is the selection criteria and the selection process through which this company was chosen to undertake this in the interests of Barbadians, allegedly, well, he's bound to come to the conclusion that perhaps there's some form of corruption. The perception is obvious. Perception is strong. Perception is real. Mr. Speaker, you can perhaps give me the precise figures. But my understanding is that these vaccines should be available at a very affordable cost for a country like ours at $3 or $4. I think that's US. But when you hear on the street, and the average man on the street is hearing, when he hears, that's what I'm saying, that the Barbados government strapped for cash in strained economic circumstances in 2021, struggling to keep people surviving at the barest minimum in many instances, as you well know, in your area and in mine. The government is willing to pay 23 and 24, and that's US dollars, I think. When you hear that, is there any wonder that there's a perception of corruption? I'm agreeing with the honorable member for St. Joseph. A lot of the time there's a perception of corruption. The reality of corruption has to be dealt with, Mr. Speaker. The perception of corruption also has to be dealt with. And it cannot be dealt with by simply trying, whether it be the lips of the substantive Prime Minister or the acting Prime Minister, it cannot be achieved by simply trying to castigate an opposition member who simply raises questions that people outside are raising anyhow, and questions which become obvious to anybody. Or the government castigating any leader of any party anywhere in this country who raises it, dismisses it as a red herring. Mr. Speaker, can you easily dismiss such as a red herring? If the actual cost should be about $5, and you're paying 23 and 24 in these times. If it's a red herring, it's a very big red herring. And people are not amused by these things. Mr. Speaker, why would the Minister of Health not know of these arrangements? Let me put that otherwise. Why would the Minister of Health not be advised of, informed of, be party to the discussion on these arrangements? Yeah, you can have correspondence under the hand of the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Health, but a poor, hard-working minister doing his best to help to drive and lead the process of the response to the COVID threat, its impact upon Barbados, does not know. And he does not know because he's not being told, because nobody wants to place added stress on his already burdened shoulders. So he must be left to treat to the other things related to the COVID fight. But when it comes to the acquisition of vaccines, our main arsenal, our main tool in our arsenal of response, you spare him that knowledge. But a functionary under his leadership can write officially corresponding on behalf of the Barbados government. Now, I would imagine that if the Minister of Health does not know, the Cabinet does not know. Because the Minister of Health sits in the Cabinet of Barbados. And it can't be that any discussion pertaining to this went down at Cabinet level and the Minister was deaf while that happened, or asked to leave the room to protect his well-being because the discussion would be too stressful for his hearing and his ears. So I would imagine the Cabinet didn't know. If I'm wrong, I should be corrected, and soon. Now, if the Cabinet didn't know, then where exactly did the discussion take place? In whose mind and in whose company were these decisions made? And was the Prime Minister off on a frolic on her own? Of course, Mr. Speaker, members of the Cabinet will have to square with that. And if they knew, they should say that they knew, and that they were in agreement that the Minister of Health should not be told to spare him added burden on his already weighty shoulders. Mr. Speaker, when things like these go down, the perception is birthed in the bosom and minds of people that there is corruption. And as a parliament, as a group of lawmakers, they have to treat to the reality as well as the perception of corruption. So, Mr. Speaker, we got to start marking time. We have to deal with what we perceive to be those intermittent episodes when people make excursions into corrupt practices in Barbados. Recognize that we're confronted with a culture, that it is systemic, that it is endemic, and that the Parliament's responsibility here is to make a substantive difference to what obtains, and quickly so, in the interests of Barbados. Now those things said by myself thus far would not be well received. Maybe uncomfortable and awkward. And I may be quite off the mark. And if I'm quite off the mark, I simply have to be told I'm quite off the mark. I'll tell the rest of Barbados, listen, I was quite off the mark, and so are some of you. But in the absence of anything to suggest that we are off the mark. We have to believe that what we perceive could actually be the reality. And this is in a context, Mr. Speaker. This is in the context. Because you can't give the whole hog to one man. Mr. Speaker, you can't give the whole hog to one man. It does not matter who he is. It does not matter what hue of skin he wears. It does not matter what initials represent his name. You can't give the whole hog to one man. 24 million at Valerie. Those words sound familiar, Mr. Speaker? It's $24 million. The Valerie project at Britton's Hill. Words sound familiar, Mr. Speaker, to you? You've been wrong long enough. $24 million to one man at Valerie. $28 million to the same man at the Grotto, Mr. Speaker. And this is not a voice that is sounding forth in celebratory note. This is a voice that is sounding forth in great lament and condemnation, that you can give to one man 24 million. Come back and give to the same man 28 million. You can't give to the same man 54 million at birth, for birth 5 at the port. Those words sound familiar yet, Mr. Speaker? You heard those. I heard those. I agreed with those words. So did you. So did all of us. And then another $50 million in equipment at the same port. All one man. Same initials. Same hue. Skin. Same one man is being railed against as an action which is undesirable for this country. Then I agreed with that. And then you put him in pole position for another $200 million at berth 6, for berth 6. Same man, Mr. Speaker, you doing the maths? I've never heard of you as a mathematician. 24, 28, 54, 50, 200. Real millions there. I've lost count. Can't do this. One man. To add insult to injury, you allowed him all the trams and trolleys that transport tourists from the ships to the terminal in the port. Same man. Same man. You can't give all of this to one man. And you do all of this while struggling taxi men can't even make $100 a day. And that's pre-COVID. That's before COVID. Can make $100 a day, so you know what's happening now. You give all of this to one man, and it was utterly and bitterly condemned, and justly so. And then you allowed him 1 or 2 acres for a cement operation just outside the precincts of the same port. Same man. Same man. When these things happen, there's the perception of corruption. That was the message then. That we perceive there must be corruption. If you're doing all of this in the interest of one man, there must be corruption. That's what we were shouting from the rooftops and the platforms. And then you give him all the acreage up at Coverley that was owned by NHC to build 1,100 houses and to earn $100,000 on each house. Same man. Same man. The same man, by the way, the vaccine man. Same man. Same man. Then you gave him 5 acres up there for him to collect in excess of $100,000 per month in rent. Same man. On top of that, 2,300 lots at Bushy Park. Mr. Speaker, one man. This government, in opposition, railed, and justly so, against that, condemned that, told the people of Barbados we need to have a change in government in this country for things like this. But that was then. Mr. Speaker, I heard recently of some potential prospective development relative to renewable energies around the Bushy Park area. I am waiting, Mr. Speaker, to see if this renewable energy project, which is proposed and which is substantial, and it is supposed to be near Bushy Park, is anyway connected with this one man. I hope not. I'm waiting to see. I'm waiting to hear. I'm waiting to see, as you are, Mr. Speaker, what becomes of the efforts to establish a marijuana industry in Barbados and who will be the substantial beneficiaries of that particular facilitation by legislation passed in this Parliament. Waiting to see. Waiting to hear. Waiting to know. Say, man, there's an airport private lounge facility, Mr. Speaker. Say, man. Airport operation, lounge operation that accommodates private business, travel and jets and so forth. Say, man. Say, man. Say, man. Say, man. And then, Mr. Speaker, there was the facilitating of the Ross staff and Ross student population in those unoccupied houses up at Corverley, facilitating that. An operation that somehow moved from Dominica here to Barbados in questionable circumstances. Same man, yes. You have your opinion, I have mine. You have your information, I have mine. Same man benefits substantially from that. Country may benefit from their presence and their spending, but substantially same man. And can you give all of this to one man? And you mean you railed against it and then you come and you facilitate the more? And you say there cannot be a perception of corruption? Then you ensure the demolition of the liquidation center to make way for the higher. Same man. Same man. Same man. Now you know this, you hear this, and understandably you have to be quiet. But you hear this, you know this, and then you have to repair to your bed at St. Michael Northwest, and you have to repair to your bed in St. John, and you have to repair to your bed in Christchurch East Central and Christchurch East and St. Lucie, knowing this, that we condemned this type of thing. One man. But now we facilitate it even further. And in the context of all of that, we stand to talk about anti-corruption legislation and how serious we are and how we're going to prosecute this person and prosecute that person. Just give us time. One man continues to build bigger and bigger barns on the backs of the people of Barbados. What about the upscale elements of the whole project? I'm not talking the low-end aspects of the whole project. I'm talking about the upscale aspects, the more sophisticated aspects, the more productive, financially so, aspects of the whole project. Is it the same man? And now an attempted vaccine project using the same man And Mr. Speaker, you see the situation here. I understand the situation, you know. There's no risk at all involved for this company, Radical Investments. Government guarantees you a price if, according to the reports, you can acquire these vaccines. We will guarantee you this price. There's no risk involved in this venture. Once we get it, government will pay. And the Minister of Health doesn't know because there's a Ministry of Finance thing. So perhaps the member for Christchurch East Central knows, or South Central, or Ambassador, His Excellency, Clyde Maskell, or one of the many other advisors and consultants around the Ministry of, maybe they know. The Minister of Health doesn't know because this is too much for him to hear. He can't carry this in his bosom. Already overloaded. Guaranteed sale price for a no venture, a no risk venture. That's what it is. Public perception is that these decisions often, Mr. Speaker, you know it, I've heard it. The Honorable Member for St. Joseph alluded to it. The perception is politicians are corrupt, and often the perception is that these decisions have to do with one or two things. Either personal financial advancement to some people, including politicians, or significant financial contributions to the party that facilitates it. That's the perception, Mr. Speaker. So when people hear these things, you can't blame them if they come to the conclusion, even if they are in error in so arriving at that conclusion, you can't blame them when they come to the conclusion that there's corruption here. Some politician is benefiting or some party is benefiting. Can you imagine that? You're making 12 and 13 US dollars. 12 and 13 million US dollars on a project to try to acquire some vaccines for poor Barbadian people who are in need. I support the view, Mr. Speaker, beyond this legislation, we need to introduce some very important other legislation, because some of these pieces don't significantly stand alone without support legislation. You can't have meaningful anti-corruption legislation unless, as the Honorable Attorney General acknowledged, you have robust whistleblowing legislation. We promise these things, they will come. Clause, Section 8 of this bill speaks of bribery in relation to contracts and tenders. A person who offers an advantage to a person exercising public functions as an inducement or reward for otherwise on account of his giving assistance or using his real or supposed influence in the promotion, procuring, or execution of any contract with a public authority for the supply of any goods, services, or works, or any subcontract under a contract referred to, or the payment of the price or a consideration stipulated or otherwise provided for any contract or subcontract referred to, a person is guilty of an offense. Likewise, a person exercising public functions who solicits or accepts an advantage as an inducement or reward, etc. These persons, whether you attempt to bribe somebody or somebody facilitates you on the basis of having received a bribe from you, is captured here in Section 8 or Clause 8, whatever is the preferred language, bribery in relation to contract and tenders. Mr. Speaker, we need to have legislation that provides for a contractor general in Barbados. It's not the first time I've sounded my voice on that. There's a lot of corruption around, and historically so, around the business of award of contracts in Barbados. You need to provide for a contractor general. Now, there are those who would argue that the award of contracts should fall to some committee, commission mechanism which is outside of the political class. I don't support that. The people elected these honorable persons to come here as their representatives and to make decisions on their behalf, and they're charged with that fiduciary responsibility. So I don't support that. It has to be taken away from the purview of government itself, or the political component of government itself. I believe it should remain the purview of elected officials. But we can improve the system by having a contractor general. That's a strong institution. So that's more than just a single office. That is a strong and important institution. We need a contractor general to help us review and to monitor and to investigate the award of public contracts. From time immemorial in Barbados, overall administrations, there's been speculation around contracts in Barbados and how some people get these contracts, whether it's one man or many men, how they have arrived at being beneficiaries of these contracts. We need a contractor general to ensure compliance with agreed terms. Mr. Speaker, a lot of inefficiencies and cost overruns attaching to contracts have added to the burdens of the cost on taxpayers' pockets in Barbados, where economies with constrained circumstances with respect to revenue earnings, both domestically and in foreign external circumstances or circles. We can't afford to be losing. We can't afford to be losing the financial wherewithal of this country's small, constrained economy by the number of dollars, millions of dollars lost to inefficiencies and cost overruns because the process of contracting and monitoring and investigating how these contracts are fulfilled, pursued, and that which is the product of these efforts, if it's not properly monitored, the inefficiencies cost us. Then, of course, the issue of impropriety and irregularity. We need to protect the procurement system. The honorable member for St. Joseph mentioned that. It's about procurement. That whole vaccine thing is about procurement. We need to protect the integrity of the procurement system and process. We need a contractor general with the authority and capacity, the power to take punitive action against those who trespass or breach that which is provided for in the legislation. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to just make reference to a few documents here. These are some of the issues that constitute the culture in which we operate in. This is a recommendation from the 1979 Cox Commission report, and it has to do with the involvement of parliamentarians and political personalities and officials in the business of contract. Members of the Houses of Parliament should not be permitted to participate in contracts with the government. That is an obviously, you would think. And I don't know that that happens. If it happens, that information has not reached me yet. If any man or woman, honorable man or woman on the other side, is aware that members of the parliament, of this parliament or any parliament, has been participating in contracts with the government, then I would not mind being enlightened as to that. But, Mr. Speaker, I don't fear that members of parliament are made beneficiaries of participating in such contracts. But what about their families, Mr. Speaker? What about their relatives, Mr. Speaker? That is part of the corruption, the culture of corruption. You don't do it yourself, but a cousin crossed the road, an in-law up the hill. Your relatives, your family. That is part of the culture of corruption that obtains down here among us. The 2020 report of the Auditor General to this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, speaks with reference to the Poverty Eradication Fund. And in the context of things, we may think that these are small numbers that we are dealing with here. He says, under doubtful disbursements from the fund, we're talking corruption. Notwithstanding the limitation in determining the appropriateness for disbursements from the Poverty Eradication Fund, there were disbursements which seem not to readily fit the description of alleviation of poverty, Mr. Speaker. These included disbursements for mortgage arrears. I'm sure they didn't help to pay the mortgage of my honorable friend from St. Michael East, even when he was in charge of the Poverty Alleviation Eradication Fund. These included disbursements for mortgage arrears for a marriage seminar and sponsorship of shows. The criteria used to approve the disbursements was not provided. A previous coordinator of the fund was of the opinion that assistance for mortgages was definitely not part of them. I'm just citing you. What happens? It happens at the lower levels. It happens at the higher levels. And there is, Mr. Speaker, strong evidence of a culture of corruption that we have to deal with. It's not just the spasmodic every now and then instance of corruption by some misguided official. It is culture. It may be small monies in some instances. Sometimes it gets rather big. This is from the...
Mr. Speaker, sir?
I'm
On a point of order,
representing.
sir, I'd just like to give 1 second of clarification. The honorable member, yes, he's referring to the Auditor General's report.
Yes.
But that report, we had indicated in our request for it to run from 2016 until 20, just to ensure that we had coverage and not being pigeonholing anybody in respect of it. And therefore, whatever the honorable member is reading happened during the last administration that is registered there. And the records will show that, sir.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I am not charging this administration with anything. The point I'm making with respect to that matter, I'm not charging this administration or this minister with anything. The point I'm making is that what we are facing down is a culture of corruption that's endemic in the system in Barbados, and it involves high levels of funding, and it involves lower volumes of financing as well. So it runs the whole gamut and range. It's not the big ones, the one man that benefits to the extent of multi-millions of dollars. It's also smaller fellas down the line who benefit from the sponsorship of a show or the support of a marriage seminar. Small and big. This one, Mr. Speaker, is not so small. And this is from the Auditor General's report of 2020. Mr. Speaker, they are doing tender process. Yeah, Barbados aren't concerned with these things. Of the 1.49, Mr. Speaker, listen very carefully. Of the 1.49 billion, not million, billion with a B, of the $1.49 billion in goods and services which the Barbados Water Authority sought to acquire, it was observed that approximately 90% of these arrangements did not go out to public tender. I'm talking about the procurement process, Mr. Speaker. In small ways, it is breach. In major ways, it is breach. Not pointing to anybody or any administration. I'm pointing to a system and a culture that operates in Barbados, and I'm saying, repeatedly so, the Parliament of Barbados, above all else, has a responsibility for addressing this in meaningful ways. $1.4 billion, Mr. Speaker, 90% of which did not fall subject to proper tender process. This was in breach of the BWA's procurement rules and financial management and audit financial rules. which have been adopted by the authority. These require tender process for the acquisition of goods and services above $200,000. That, Mr. Speaker, part of the reality. You know the 1.4 billion? Payment for consultancy service. Same 2020 Auditor General's report. It was observed that the equivalent of Barbados 5.5 million was paid to an overseas firm in respect of an invoice for previous expenses, fees, reimbursable expenses, and commissions from a smart meter project for Barbados. The audit sought to clarify the nature of the services outlined and to verify whether they were actually performed. Mr. Speaker, however, in discussion with management from the Barbados Water Authority and the previous chairman, there was no confirmation that any service was performed. But $5.5 million was paid. Here's a comment of the Auditor General, and supports what I'm trying to say. This is a very serious matter which needs to be investigated by relevant legal authorities. Mr. Speaker, it points to possible corruption at all levels, the highest levels, the middle level, the lower levels in Barbados. Honourable Member for St. Joseph referred to the fact that the UN Convention on Corruption is attached to this legislation, becomes part of the law in Barbados. I read from Article 9 of that convention. Each state party shall, in accordance with the fundamental principles of its legal system, take the necessary steps to establish appropriate systems of procurement. I'm saying one of those is the appointment of a contractor general, the setting up of an institution, the contractor general. A system of procurement based on transparency, competition, and objective criteria in decision making that are effective, inter alia, in preventing corruption. So it is part of the convention that we seek to incorporate into the law of Barbados. And not talking anything that nobody knows. That is Article 9, Mr. Speaker, of the convention. We need a contractor general. We need to ensure the procurement, the integrity of the procurement system. We need campaign finance laws in Barbados, Mr. Speaker. We need campaign finance laws in Barbados, Mr. Speaker. Some of these bits of legislation fall short of the intended goal unless they are part of that suite of legislation that we are being promised in this country. Now, Mr. Speaker, the absence of campaign financing and election financing will keep the door open for corruption in Barbados. Because those with sinister motives, those driven by a sense of greed to get more and more, those who seem to think that the hog is just for them, or that the cake is to be provided for them alone, will always find that because parties in politics in Barbados, because the system of election in Barbados is significantly financed by private interest funding, in the absence of electoral financing reform, party financing reforms, the door remains open to corruption in Barbados. We need to close that door. We need to close that door. Honorable Member for St. Joseph alluded to the fact that those around him, those he has observed as part of this present core of politicians and ministers, are not those who are given to corruption of this sort. But the same cannot be said for shadows out there, white or black, if there is anything such as a black shadow. Shadows out there, white or black, who lurk behind the door looking for a way in. We need to close that door. Especially so that those who have now come to this level of political practice and government in Barbados, ministers who are young in their portfolio, who are seeking to make an honest contribution to this country, who work hard, who go to sleep late, who carry the burden of understanding the financial milieu in which this country finds itself, and helps the Prime Minister to wade her way through that. Members like the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, people who come here with honest, honourable intentions to serve, should not be made to part of a system that is subjected to potential corruption because the doors remain open in the absence of electoral financing. There are those who contribute to elections in Barbados and to party organizations in Barbados, and they do it sincerely, not looking for any pushback, kickback. They don't do it in an effort to corrupt any politician. But then there are those, Mr. Speaker, you know that and I know that. That is their modus operandi. They want to buy politicians. They want to buy political parties. They want to buy governments. We cannot continue to keep the door open to corruption of the political process. Campaign financing is expensive, Mr. Speaker, but it should not be viewed simply as an expense. I see it, Mr. Speaker, positively so, as an investment in the democratic process in Barbados. It's not just a cost. It is an investment. It's like paying down on your house, Mr. Speaker. It's not just a cost. Paying down on your property, Mr. Speaker, is not just an expense. It is an investment. And we are investing when the taxpayers of this country, when the public purse of this country supports the political process at the electoral level, and when parties are properly financed, not in the way they are now and the extent to which they are now, but when parties in this mix are properly funded and financed, Speaker, I'm trying to be kind to some people here. But if they persist with their pettiness and petulance, I will deal with them accordingly. With your leave, of course.
I don't give leave for that.
And I'm speaking, Mr. Speaker.
Metaphorically, because we don't.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Okay.
And I'm speaking in the interest of those who are new to this business. I don't mind the Honourable Member for St. James Central. He will be here for a while yet, and then he'll be gone. Just like myself. Just like myself. But there's some who have just arrived for their first term. They're green, they're new. And the demands and the pressures will be many and much. We don't want the system to expose them to the corrupt and greed and evil machinations of people out there who don't have the best interests of Barbados at heart. They're not about building a democracy. They're about building their bank accounts. And they see the opportunity of supporting a politician. They see the opportunity of funding a party as their ticket to get through the door. I'm speaking in the interest of honourable members like this honourable gentleman from Christchurch East Central, who is new here, an honourable gentleman from St. John, and the honourable lady from St. George North, who have just come. This will not represent a challenge to me. It will represent a challenge to those who are behind us. We need to close the door on the corruption, invest in electoral practice in Barbados, and save the system and save the country and save our democracy. Help to keep power in the hands of the people as it ought to be, especially when we shift to a republic. Help to keep power in the hands of the people and take the power out of the economically affluent class who feel that they can pick up a phone and call the prime minister, call the shots, or call a minister and call the shots, and who will brag to their friends in greed and their brothers in these sinister practices. Look, man, I can call him anytime. Look, watch I can tell you now. That kind of nonsense happening in Barbados. That kind of nonsense happening in Barbados. And there are people out there who are arguing about who is easier to buy than whom. It's a culture. It's a system. And any effort at anti-corruption legislation must take cognizance of that, because corruption has the potential to denude our democracy of the richness that we've been trying to imbuild into it, take away from the whole precept of representative practice, representative democracy. It has the capacity to undermine the legitimacy of our institutions, the integrity of our, including our judicial institutions, Mr. Speaker. I used to be of the view that whereas we had issues in Barbados with corruption, that when it came to judicial practice, that was not the case. I have been awakened in relatively recent terms to a new reality, that the threat of corruption is being faced down not only by our other institutions, but by our judicial institutions as well. And the practice of law enforcement in Barbados. I will read to you, Mr. Speaker, to us from Article 11, the same UN Convention. It becomes law for Barbados. Bearing in mind the independence of the judiciary and its crucial role in combating corruption, each state party shall, in accordance with the fundamental principle of its legal system and without prejudice to judicial independence, take measures to strengthen the integrity and to prevent corruption, opportunities for corruption among members of the judiciary. Now, it's important and it's underscored, it's underlined in the UN Convention that we're attaching to this and making part of Barbados law. Because the reality is that those who are purveyors of corrupt practices, those who are insistent on wending their economic way through this world by recourse to corruption, understand the value of getting members of the judiciary within their power as well. We don't want to have to face that down here in Barbados. This business of corruption is pervasive and nasty, and the legislation that comes to confront it must be equally robust and all-embracing, and it can't be simply an exercise in marking time and in cosmetics. Corruption has the capacity to derail, turn back, erode all the gains that we have made in socioeconomic and political independence here in Barbados, to tarnish our mechanisms of governance. It has that potential. Corruption is part of which contributes to the persistent inequities that exist in the Barbados economy. It's because of corruption that, to a large extent, those who are subject to an existence of poverty remain, because those who have seek to get more. Corruption facilitates that for them. We need to break that cycle in Barbados and to stop that. I believe we're running behind the game. I think the Honorable Attorney General says we're a little bit late out of the gates. We're running behind the game. Corruption now takes place at an escalated level all around the world. And even here in this region, there's the element of transnational organized crime. You read page 26 of the same UN document, there's a concern. It's significantly placed high, it's placed in a significantly high position in the preamble, the concern about the links between corruption and other forms of crime, organized crime, economic crime, including money laundering. Corruption is no longer a local matter, but a transnational phenomenon that affects all societies and economies, making international cooperation to prevent and control it essential. If we join this to our law, we have to understand what we are in. We aren't making sport with 2 or 3 people cross the road. We're coming up to confront a transnational giant called organized crime and corruption that manifests itself in behaviors such as money laundering practices, the drug and politics relationship that is emerging across many countries. And my fear is that has already taken a bit of a root here in Barbados. And I'm not saying that now because I sit or stand here. I've been saying that since 2007. That emerging link between people who are known to be in the front of the drug trade in Barbados, in illegal trafficking in arms, and people who are close to the political process or are in the bosom of the practice of politics in Barbados. I was reading, and I do not know the extent to which there is authenticity attaching to the story. What about international money laundering activities taking place transnationally so that have touched Barbados banking system and has touched this economy and this society? We don't hear anything said to us about that. We don't expect to hear the details and all the specifics about what is happening with respect to investigations. But we certainly need to be told, look, this is one of the challenges that we face. International money launderers using the offshore business and the financial sector in Barbados. Corrupt practices being pervaded by many with the potential to derail our reputation and our economy. You hear a lot about that. We don't expect to know what law enforcement necessarily is doing to investigate person A or person B. But I haven't heard anything mentioned about that here in Barbados. Recently, I heard stories of persons who admitted to being part of a traffic scheme with respect to guns coming into Barbados. We have a problem with guns in Barbados, illegal guns. We've acknowledged that. Well, I heard about that, and arrests being made in the United States, and people being charged, and admitting to wrong. And speaking of links to Barbados, I haven't heard anything about that here. Now, when you don't hear these things, people believe, Mr. Speaker, that there's corruption involved, and that those who are linked to these things here are the untouchables among us. People of Barbados does not want to hear from any parliament that they have elected that there are those out there who are untouchable. If you can go and grab the boy down in Richmond when he breaches the law in some minor way, or carry away the young lady up in Park Road or Savannah Road in Station Hill that goes into a shop and shoplifts some deodorant or something, you can carry them away. Then you got to deal with the large looming shadows behind these corrupt practices in Barbados. If you're not going to do that, we need to close the doors and go home. Call it a day. I heard about some ship-related story of drugs emanating from Barbados. Mr. Speaker, these things are true, do you know? Because we don't know. And if they are, they have implications for all of us. Serious stress. Mr. Speaker, I have to mention this because I have a fear as to what is happening with respect to the public service and public sector. See this business of introducing this new approach to putting people at high levels in the public service on contracts? You see this business of putting people in the public service, public sector at high level they're operating, putting on contracts. I don't think the country is comfortable with that. You know, this article speaks to that type of thing, this convention that we are making a part of Barbados law. Article 7, Mr. Speaker, each state party shall, where appropriate, and in accordance with the fundamental principles of its legal system, endeavor to adopt, maintain, and strengthen systems for the recruitment, hiring, retention, promotion, and retirement of civil servants, and where appropriate, other non-elected public officials. I don't like this business of putting people on contract at these high levels in the civil service. I'll be honest with you, full disclosure. Years ago, I remember asking the then Prime Minister, former late Prime Minister, we were having a chat, and I was concerned as to some levels of performance among people operating at the level of permanent secretary in the public service. And I asked him then if he ever gave any consideration to having these people put on contracts, and does it obtain anywhere? He did not express any favorable disposition to going in that direction. And one can lament sometimes that the process of governing can be frustrated by persons in these positions for various reasons, whether it is lack of sufficient quality or competence, whether it is political bias. These things can happen as reality. But the other side of that reality is that when you take these people out of the conventional public service framework and you put them on contracts, then you make them, in my view, more subject to the whims and fancies of the government of the day. So we can do it at agriculture, or we can do it at education, or we can do it wherever we want. But the question still has to be faced. Do we then make these people more subject to political pressure? Do we then make them more the subjects of the political wishes, will, and fancies and whims of the government of the day? We can render such servants subject to political influence and pressure and victimization. This article also speaks to politicization of law enforcement agencies. Now, I would hope that we in Barbados are not drifting to that place where the political pressure on law enforcement officials is such that they can't function in a way that speaks to the interests of Barbadians. The things that have taken place under this administration, under the previous administration, under more previous administration, with respect to law enforcement in this country. And all I'm saying here, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about corruption, we're talking about a culture. We're not simply talking about acts, individual acts here and there. We're talking about a system. We're talking about a culture. That is what we are trying to face down, and that, therefore, is what we should address by way of legislation. We can't play politics with the police force. It doesn't matter whether we be DP, U, or otherwise. Can't play politics with the police force. Very, very entrenched and ugly practice, Mr. Speaker. And anybody who would want to stand up here and tell me it doesn't happen in Barbados is not being necessarily friendly with the truth. We pressurize people in the media. There are people in the media who become victims. The climate that seems to obtain now is a climate of fear. Maybe fear is too strong a word, I don't know. But it's a climate of trepidation out there among media practitioners. That you can't report fully, that you can't report truly, that you dare not ask certain questions. You dare not address certain subjects, because if you do, the connections with your media boss will be activated such that you end up on the wrong end, out of a job. That's happened. It's happened many times in Barbados. It's happened in recent years. There are those who are fearful now. I had a call from one of them up to this morning. They're those who are frightened now. And this pressurization of people who are charged with an honest responsibility to report. This is the ugly part of what makes for a strong, entrenched system of corruption, a culture of corruption. The media, Mr. Speaker, is one of the defending planks of our democracy. It is also one of the building structures of that democracy. They want to pressurize people, make them lose their jobs. Leave the media altogether. Worse yet, leave the country altogether. That's the reality in Barbados. These articles also speak to that, the whole process of reporting in a broader frame. These are what contribute, Mr. Speaker. These are dynamics, factors that contribute to the establishment and entrenchment of a culture of corruption. They construct a platform upon which corruption thrives without fear. The business of statutory corporations not reporting on the operations, not subjecting themselves to proper audits in good time. You see, we, for good reasons, moved a lot of the operations of our central government into statutory enterprises to facilitate work, to get the job done in better ways, to manage the processes properly. We took that away from central government. In so doing, with good intentions, Mr. Speaker, we help also to create further potential for corruption. And when we don't establish systems and reporting responsibilities and insist upon them in legislation such that they must do what is mandated of them in the interest of the Barbadian people, then corruption thrives. Then you hear about Barbados Water Authority. And you hear about this, and you hear about that, Transport Board. Mr. Speaker, that is the milieu in which we operate. So I make a call for us to make sure that we have a proper environment in which media personnel can operate, that we desist from any ugly practice of pressurizing, interfering with law enforcement and policing in Barbados. Business of media, though, I must say, if I'm going to be fully honest, we got some intellectually dishonest people who have the privilege of writing in our daily journals from time to time. Sometimes they don't have a clue as to what they're talking about. They must meet an obligation of submitting a weekly article, and then they free themselves of all kinds of garbage. And the unfortunate thing is that there are allegedly intellectuals occupying intellectual spaces, and our young people are exposed to their influence, writing foolishness, talking nonsense about B's and D's and J's and A's and speakers and clerks and all kind of nonsense. So both sides of the story. We have to live with them or deal with them, but where the media is pursuing an honest role of reporting and giving a critical evaluation of what is going down, this practice of silencing them, getting rid of them, does not help our democratic practice, and it helps to entrench the business of corruption. This Parliament has a huge mandate to correct some of these things. When we were in opposition, we railed against these things. When we were in opposition, we railed against these things and pointed fingers at people. You can't now be found to be short. You can't now be found to be falling short of the mandate laid at your doorstep. Thank you, sir.
Honorable Member for St. James Central. You need to turn your mic, Honorable Member.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I thank you for the opportunity to make a very brief intervention in this matter. I listened carefully to the honorable member, sir, and he reminded me of my days, and I think it was in fourth form at my alma mater, where there was written on the wooden paneling around the blackboard.
Mr. Michael West, you turn off. Honorable.
The wooden paneling around the blackboard, the 7 fundamental P's of life. Prior preparation and planning prevents particularly poor performance. And it came startlingly home, sir, as I listened to the honorable member, who I believe has struck a number of very important chords. Thematically, I must confess, sir, that I do agree to some extent with that which he has said, and I do give him the credit of having struck a number of very important chords on this matter of corruption. I do, however, sir, also feel that he unfortunately did himself an injustice and caused himself to lose his way very early in the stage of the presentation. There is no doubt that one should begin by recognizing the learned Attorney General of Barbados for having brought the repeal of prevention, brought an act which will repeal the Prevention of Corruption Act in Barbados. That act, as I believe the Attorney General has pointed this out already, is nearly 100 years old. And the fact of the matter is that one does not have to be in this place. One only has to be a Barbadian to feel a sense of concern, if not shame. That hearkened all the way back. In fact, I think it became most acute when the former Prime Minister of this country, who was an honorable member from St. Michael South, I believe, suggested that the Prevention of Corruption Act, and that would have been in 2018 or so, was something that we could still be proud about because it still functioned as the law of Barbados, or some trivial type of explanation like that he offered. And I think it was a slap in the face to the country then, and it is a slap in the face to the country until this day, that Barbados has had to treat, notwithstanding all of our collective concerns about the issue of corruption, we have had to treat to that matter with a piece of legislation that at magistrates court level would see a maximum fine being applied of $240, or at the high court level of $2,400 odd. That's how we treated to it. And so therefore I felt a sense of shame then to hear a leader of my land speak in those terms. And I feel a sense of joy now to see an Attorney General of Barbados come with substantive reform to the legislative arrangements in the country. Now, Mr. Speaker, sir, I think that equally one has as a point of departure to recognize the work that has been done by Integrity Barbados. I want to say, sir, because not only because I know some of the people who are involved in Integrity Barbados, but I want to say that it is a good and wholesome and desirable thing to have people from the private sector of this country, people from neighborhoods in which we all live, people, sir, who we interact with on a day-by-day basis in the workplace. We butt upon them in the supermarket, sir. We see them at our places of recreation. We jump alongside them Kadooment Day. That they take their time out to work together, to offer the country, and, sir, offer by extension the government in particular, their views, a menu of ideas which are expected to help shape the way forward with respect to removing the scourge of corruption for Barbados. They are Barbadians, sir, right-thinking all, who feel that this matter has been around for too long and that it needs to be confronted and wrestled to the ground. And I want from this place at the very beginning of this intervention, sir, to recognize and to thank them for the work that they have done. I believe, sir, that their expectations are entirely legitimate. I have heard them. I have read that which they have submitted. I, too, and this is where I agree with the honorable member, I have no difficulty whatsoever in saying that there are people in Barbados who fear the rise of a culture of corruption. We have seen it happen in other parts of the Caribbean. And when you see it, sir, and when you smell it, sir, and when you recognize it, you feel, sir, that that which you have seen, and I'm not going to name any particular country in this region, because it is not for me to disparage any CARICOM system member state, or anywhere else in the world for that matter. But when you have seen it and read the stories, the horror stories in the news, when you follow what can happen, sir, when you follow the media, you recognize that this matter of corruption raising its head is something that is a grave cause of concern. And for all the reasons that the honourable member outlined, I agree, Mr. Speaker, sir. I think perhaps, and I made a note of it somewhere, I believe he may actually have contradicted himself to some extent, because he said that future acts of corruption do not represent a challenge to him. It represented a challenge to members who are new and green. I believe I understood what he was saying. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, beyond the members in here, the fact is that the future acts of corruption impact on the developmental trajectory of this country. The future acts of corruption, which we must all fight against, impact, Mr. Speaker, sir, on the integrity of our system of governance. And in a young democracy, that is something that every right-thinking Barbadian, and I'm unapologetic in putting it that way, every right-thinking Barbadian must be deeply concerned about. Now, it is all well and good for honourable members speaking across the well of the House in a very traditional, combative way, and we've all seen this as part of the evolution of partisan political exercise in the Westminster-style democracy that we practice, sir. We understand that the fingers will point. I feel that were I the leader of the opposition, I would have wanted to rein myself in a little bit, because, you know, in many ways, the leader of the opposition of a country, especially one of the constitutional arrangements that we have, is that sole officer who is most heavily charged with being the principal watchdog. And the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, that there is such a thing, and if he wants to talk about younger members, then I want to remind younger members that there is, in fact, a thing, because they've never seen it in this House, called parliamentary question time, where the opposition, howsoever slender it may be, can raise questions of concern, if these things are legitimate matters of concern in the mind of the opposition member. Howsoever small the opposition membership may be, nothing stops you from raising a parliamentary question. And there is, according to the rules of the House, as I understand it, a duty on the ministerial ranks to respond and to do so in a timely and appropriate manner, Mr. Speaker, sir. So I do not know that it is in the best interest of this debate if we are going to hear that the honourable member read in some for of international money laundering touching the banking sector of Barbados, and even to throw that out there without more, knowing as he must know the implications for the ministry responsible for international business in this country, knowing as he must know the implications for the stability of the financial sector, Mr. Speaker, in this country, and not having raised this matter before the House so that the minister responsible for international business or the minister responsible for finance would be charged with the duty to reply to his parliamentary question, is to admit, Mr. Speaker, sir, negligence of the highest order on his part. And then to add insult to injury, to go towards trafficking of guns and say that this, again, is a matter that has come to his attention or that he read about somewhere, never naming where. And Mr. Speaker, sir, I want to believe the honourable member when he said he read these things, but I also feel that I have a duty to say to the honourable member, in case he does not know or has forgotten, that he too has a duty in this matter by way of parliamentary questions, not just to sit down or stand up and make these comments as though we were outside a shop door, throwing back a white rum. But the reality is, sir, to treat to these matters with the significance and and seriousness that they, in my judgment, warrant. Because if we are going to have the conversation about corruption, Mr. Speaker, sir, let us be very clear about it. This government is 3 years old. This administration, sir, is 3 years old. And it cannot be expected, even by our most strident of critics, to have been able to rectify all of the wrongs that confronted this country within the space of 36 months.
Exactly.
I want to say, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we have, well, I even get into COVID, because I hear too often about the ashfall and all the other things, but I think the people of Barbados know what happened. They lived alongside me and they understand what happened. And in 3 short years, Mr. Speaker, sir, let us understand where we have gone. This debate is about an anti-corruption bill. Sir, there was no party in government before, for the last 100 years, that was prepared to bring a piece of legislation of this nature to the floor of the Parliament of Barbados. So I don't expect that we will be without criticism. I do not genuinely expect that there will be anyone who will say that we don't deserve to be criticized, because that is the nature of life. But Mr. Speaker, sir, let us be reasonable in the process. Let us not judge these few mortal men and women by the standards of gods. We have gone where none others have gone in the space of the last century by bringing this bill here. Let us debate the bill on its merit. Mr. Speaker, sir, beyond this bill, I think the Attorney General pointed the House to the fact that we had a previous piece of legislation that we brought a few months ago, which creates the specific agency that is necessary, long necessary in Barbados, which is the Anti-Corruption Agency. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is charged with the responsibility of, on a day-by-day, week-by-week, and month-by-month basis, treating to the investigation of corruption issues in the country. Again, we have gone where none others, not only in Barbados, but in the Eastern Caribbean, outside of Jamaica, have gone in history, Mr. Speaker, sir. So there's nothing, I think, for us to be lectured about in this regard. These are things, sir, that we have done to demonstrate the commitment of the government towards this struggle. The honourable member made reference to a document. I can't remember the name of it, so I don't want to do him an injustice. Not the Cox thing. It may have been a UN or some international agency document which reflected some concerns about state parties endeavoring to create appropriate systems for recruitment of public officials. I have no difficulty if that's something that the UN put forward as a postulation. Fine. But why are we in Barbados treating ourselves as though we are the scum of the earth? The mighty United States of America contracts in its top brass in every department. In every department. And they're supposed to be the God's blessing to democracy if you hear them talk. We have a system of government about which we can be proud. And our permanent secretaries and back down are permanent appointees. But Mr. Speaker, sir, do not say that because of the fact that in an effort to expedite business, in an effort to make sure there's better delivery to our citizens, Mr. Speaker, that if you contract a few, that this is now a sign of corruption or tendency in the direction of corruption. That, sir, leaves me far, far, far from being persuaded as to the substance of the argument. Because if that is the case, then the same people who are leading the worldwide corruption fight, which is the United States of America, are the most guilty. Because if that is what we're premising the argument on, they bring in their whole top brass by way of contract. Well, Mr. Speaker, sir, this government has also brought within the last 3 years an integrity in public life bill. Not the fault of anyone in this lower house that it was defeated upstairs in the Senate. The point is we brought it. And if you are going to impute improper motive to the government, as I believe was done by the leader of the opposition, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, let us be faithful to fact. I beg you, no more. I beg no more than faithfulness to the facts. because not only did we bring it, and it was defeated outside of this House, but Mr. Speaker, sir, the honourable member for St. Joseph has indicated that he's bringing it again. So if there is a suggestion that we were not serious about it, then why would we be bringing it a second time? And why was it defeated, sir? I am not going to get into who was present, who was absent, and all that kind of thing, because I genuinely believe that you come to a point in your parliamentary life when you can separate the chaff from the grain and the minutiae and the mundane from the substance. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, there was an issue. And the issue in the Senate was that they felt that judges, the judiciary, should be captured in that legislation. No argument with that as far as I'm concerned. I stood here just now, listened to a whole leader of Her Majesty's opposition saying that the judiciary must not be treated as though they're beyond corruption. So fine. But Mr. Speaker, sir, let us be faithful to fact. That is where there was more work to be done on the bill. And if and when it comes back with that work having been satisfactorily done, I would hope that the leader of the opposition would find it possible to recognize the government for the commitment that it has made to trying to advance these matters. You know, Mr. Speaker, sir, I heard the leader of the opposition speak, and it's as though he has forgotten that there was a Public Finance Management Act passed in this Parliament, by this administration. And I am not and have never been either fortunate or unfortunate enough to have had ministerial responsibility for the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, I do know that that piece of legislation speaks to statutory entities and their duty to report in good time. And I marvel at a leader of the opposition standing before me a few minutes ago and indicating that that is an issue that needs to be treated in Barbados, when this administration recognized it, campaigned against it, and brought the necessary remedial tool by way of an act of the Parliament to have the matter fixed. And, Mr. Speaker, sir, the same thing goes with respect then to the Public Procurement Act. No, that act has not come. But let me say, because I have said I agree with the leader of the opposition thematically and on a number of chords he has struck. One of them is the matter of public procurement. I did, however, have the privilege of being a minister responsible for this country's international trade. And I know beyond any shadow of a doubt that transparency in public procurement is an issue not only in Barbados, but across the developing world. And if we are going to be faithful to what we're trying to achieve by way of this struggle against corruption, then we got to build in the transparency at all levels. Let's do away a little bit with the finger pointing. And perhaps the easiest way to do away with the finger pointing is to come to the understanding very clearly that there's corruption in the public sector, or everybody will agree on that, and there's corruption in the private sector. And perhaps those people who feel so holier than thou need to look a little bit at the private sector and within which they operate, and speak truth to themselves and amongst themselves as well. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, if we go back, for example, to the prevention of corruption by way of public procurement processes, sir, why is it that when I, in the private sector, tender for a contract, I am notified that I didn't get the contract, but nobody notifies me as to why I didn't get the contract? Nobody tells me, Mr. Speaker, sir, that my contract failed because of X, Y, Z, or failing to meet whatever requirement was expected. And that is accepted here in Barbados. It is accepted right across the Eastern Caribbean to the best of my knowledge. I haven't checked the relevant legislation in more recent times in many countries. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is not acceptable in Europe. Because in Europe, if you go into the competitive procurement process, the whole thing is about facilitating economic development. And this is how we keep down the small black man in Barbados. And if this discussion has to be about corruption, then let it also be a discussion about the way in which practices in the private sector are so structured, corruptly so, to undermine the development of certain categories of worker and business person in the same private sector. And if I have competed, Mr. Speaker, sir, but I can't get the contract, but I'm not told as a small fledgling enterprise where I have failed and why I have failed, because nobody is under any duty to give me reasons as exists in other parts of the world, then, Mr. Speaker, sir, I cannot ever reach the stage that some of the same people who the leader of the opposition gets in here and calls white shadows, etc., have been able to reach because of the fact that they may or may not have the arrangements in place or the associations in place that they have benefited from. But for me, as a minister responsible for commerce and development of business in Barbados, I have to say to all who care to hear, and even if they don't care to hear, I can still say it, that we have to start removing the obstacles to people who are at the smaller levels and the lower rungs of the commercial sector, sir, so that they can be more competitive. And Mr. Speaker, sir, when the Public Procurement Act comes, that is something that I robustly will want to speak to. And if it in there, I can robustly speak against the substance of the bill and the absence of that developmental tool. Because, sir, there's a duty in my view to know why. And if we get past the finger pointing, then we'll understand what this is really about. It isn't really about any one white man or white shadow, because those of us who've been around long and care to think about these things will know that in the 1980s, there was a member for St. Michael East sitting in this house who used the term white shadow, but he didn't mean the same white shadow that the honorable leader of the opposition made. And before the 1980s, he was referring to a different white shadow. That particular white shadow was supposed to have had horns, apparently, because, and not that he was horned, but he had horns. People call it a cow. And before that white shadow, there was another one. And before him, another. And on it went. And the issue developmentally, Mr. Speaker, sir, cannot be about individualistic finger pointing. There has to be a point at which intelligent people sitting in a parliament must be prepared to confront the developmental issues of the country and speak to them as they are. And what is the developmental issue? The developmental issue, in my humble submission, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that Barbados has to confront the consolidation of wealth wheresoever it exists and howsoever it exists, and treat to that problem by way of building out new opportunities for people across sectors. We are speaking effectively to a perpetuation of consolidation of wealth, consolidation of opportunity, consolidation of access, consolidation of finance, all of those things in the hands of a small pocket. And you can pick the individuals in the pocket and call them white shadows. In my view, that is true. But it is also my view, sir. And if I were the leader of the opposition sitting there as a would-be prime minister, I would say that the challenge to the country is larger. That the challenge to the country, therefore, must be that we now break down these arrangements that allow for wealth to be consolidated in small pockets. That we democratize the economic system in this country, democratize opportunity, democratize access to capital. And that takes us to a whole new panacea of issues that people conveniently sweep under the rug because you like to point a finger at a political group and say they're corrupt. But is the banking sector not corrupt if the banking sector structures itself and its business in such a way that it financially rapes the underprivileged in the land of their birth? Nobody wants to speak to that. But it's happening right now in Broad Street. Right now, the ATM machine around the corner there, Mr. Speaker, sir, next to the supermarket that they call Massy. Is the corporate culture in Barbados not corrupt? If you are facilitating these things, but you're only prepared to speak to the low-flying bird, which is you, Mr. Speaker, sir, and the member for St. Thomas, and the honorable members who sit across from me. Because it's easy to say that. I also feel, Mr. Speaker, sir, that we have to be prepared to go beyond the emotive rhetoric about the cesspools and the naughty hands behind the scenes and so on, and let us be faithful to fact. I do not know of any administration in the history of Barbados, sir, where the first order of business of the cabinet was to declare their assets. I don't know of any, but I know it happened with this particular administration. And that when I went into cabinet, sir, every member of the cabinet who went into the cabinet with me declared their assets. That is an indisputable fact in Barbados. The honorable member, sir, can talk about the naughty hands behind the scene and the cesspool and so on, but the honorable member must be faithful to fact. Because if we are going to speak about an administration that has tried to confront corruption, and let me be very frank, because I don't know any country on planet Earth where they have announced to the world, we have cured all corruption. None exists. I am yet to see that particular administration. I'm yet to see that state. I know it is a target that we all hope to reach. And I know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I am going to be hard-pressed if I ask the question, where else in the Caribbean has there been a cabinet that declared all of the assets? If I start, sir, in the south and work my way north, outside of Barbados, sir, I will pause now. Tell me where else. Tell me where. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, the fact of the matter is that we have to have a beginning with a philosophical position. And whether you like the government or don't like the government, like the leader of the government or don't like the leader of the government, you got personal issues with the people in the government or none, the fact of the matter is, sir, the philosophical position don't change. The philosophical position here is that corruption rapes an economy. And people like those in Integrity Barbados were sufficiently concerned about it to help shape views to move the country's mindset against this. This government, unlike everyone previously, and I would have to say, so I've been around for 20 years, so I could say everyone that I know about and has been part of, this is the first time, sir, that there has been a positive response of this nature with a view to having legislative reform. And you know, Mr. Speaker, sir, let me speak as an MP. One of the headaches I have in my constituency, sir, is that I have houses, I have people who are residents of St. James Central. That house get humbugged, house get let down in some cases, badly damaged in others, in tropical storm or Hurricane Elsa, whichever is the proper designation. But in Elsa, still trying to get repairs. But cash, it takes cash to care. And the cash is a hard thing to come by, Mr. Speaker, sir. The NHC didn't just find itself in this set of circumstances. The NHC, Mr. Speaker, sir, was around for a long time. And happily, I too been around a little long. I know, Mr. Speaker, of a period between 2013 and 2015 when the Public Accounts Committee held meetings, sir, in which these matters relating to the NHC were delved into. And the Accountant General, it came to public knowledge, the Accountant General actually informed the Ministry of Finance that the NHC was indebted to the government back then in the sum of $95 million, sir. And this part of the evidence of this House, that an investigation was commissioned by the Ministry of Finance when that was drawn to their attention, and an arrangement was put in place without parliamentary approval for $2.4 million to be moved every month to the National Housing Corporation, sir, without Parliament knowing, to the point where, Mr. Speaker, sir, they did not know whether they had received a loan, did not know whether they received a grant. That too is the evidence of this House. And the sum of money rose and rose, sir, to the point where just before election, it was $197 million of indebtedness by the National Housing Corporation to the Central Bank of Barbados. And Mr. Speaker, sir, 3 years later, a hurricane passes through Barbados. My constituents who had nothing to do with that are then humbugged. Your constituents as well, Mr. Speaker, sir. And the National Housing Corporation is not in a position to respond with alacrity because of the challenges of the financial circumstance born out of mismanagement of the people's money. No, sir, that is what that's why I anchor everything I say and do in a philosophical position. And I hear the honorable member talking about we used to rail about this and we used to rail about that. I rail about the same things. I felt then, as I do now, that at that time and at this time, the consolidation of wealth is a bad thing. I don't have any difficulty in saying that. It is now in the record of the House. It is in the record of the House. I felt then, as I do now, that at that time and at this time, and at all times, consolidation of wealth is a bad and undesirable thing. And that is why, as Minister responsible for business, I try my best to create opportunities to broaden the base of participation in whatever way I can in this country. I had a meeting up to yesterday, a parliamentary subcommittee on vendors, with the same, on the vending bill, with the same honorable member, and I made the point to them. This is about broadening the base of opportunity. No, there may be occasion when that fails to happen, but that's across the whole government. And government has to take stock of these things. But Mr. Speaker, sir, let us not attribute to this administration broad-based wrongdoing without any evidence. I have difficulty, sir, when an honorable member who must know better forgets that there was a housing credit fund that for the first time, for one time and one time only in its existence, declared a dividend. Out of a clear blue sky one morning, a dividend was created. And $25 million, sir, and was supposed to be made available by way of this dividend. For the first time in history, all 25 million took up and went to one private sector developer. And Mr. Speaker, sir, those were concrete facts rooted in evidence that, yes, we railed against. If the honorable member or anybody else feels that they have a puff, a whiff of evidence to suggest that those types of activities still go on in Barbados, then they must say so. They should say so. And I invite them to say so. But Mr. Speaker, sir, I do not know that it is satisfactory just to take make these kind of glib comments about circumstances without any sort of evidentiary basis. Every administration, sir, will from time to time have to explain challenging circumstances. The honourable member spent a lot of time treating to a set of circumstances that I have read about and heard about, and I figure that at some point he will bring whatever evidence he has to bring to support the suggestions that he has been making about those circumstances. But there's a difference between this administration and the ones that preceded us. This particular bill recognizes certain key principles. And I want to go there. Let us recognize that this bill has accepted that he who receiveth the bribe, whether he's in the public sector or in the private sector, is as guilty as the person who offers the bribe. And so therefore it is seeking to capture both the man who takes some money and the man who pays some money. Now, if the honourable member wants to have a debate about the pith and substance of the bill, and I wish he did, because I myself would want to make a suggestion on that point, that the bill probably could go further, and that we should, as a country, look in short order to taking it further. I don't want to hold it up by a committee today, because I know you will hear, oh, well, nothing happened, you didn't get on with it, it never came. So let the bill be passed. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's a philosophical principle that I still hold on to. And I'm going to say it, in cabinet or out of cabinet. And that philosophical principle is, sir, that a private person, sir, who offers a bribe and is found to have so offered should be disqualified from being able to access public contracts in the same way that a public official who has accepted a bribe is supposed to be disqualified from being able to hold public office. And I think that is where we have been too timid. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, it is all well and good for a man to send a brown envelope at somebody or to make a promise for somebody, and he gets away scot-free. While the person who may have fallen on hard times and felt too weak or vulnerable to say no, accept the gift, and then he, Mr. Speaker, sir, must never hold public office again. I have no brief, I make no apology for the man who has taken the bribe. He wrong, dead wrong. Go long, star. The umpire has said you are out. But equally, the man who offered the bribe, who paid the money, he too should be deprived from access to public contracts. And that is how it happens in Europe. So I don't just say these things without having prepared and read. That is how it happens in Europe. And part of the economic partnership agreement with which we are locked into with Europe says that about their contractual arrangements. But not so in Barbados. But the honourable member speaks about a white shadow. I am now speaking to a whole corporate community. Because that is the developmental difference in thought. That it can be about targeting one man, and when that man dead and gone or get too old, you target his successor. It has to be the way in which we take along the whole developmental thrust of the country, and in this particular case, the developmental thrust of the private sector of Barbados. Mr. Speaker, sir, your member speaks about the Contractor General. It is part of the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party. It has been part of the manifesto of the Barbados Labour Party that we have a Contractor General in Barbados for, I think, for the last 3 or so manifestos. So I don't need to be persuaded as to the merit of it. Perhaps, sir, again, the honourable member may just need to be a little patient, because everything can't happen in 3 years. It really can't. I don't know that you come at midterm and you find fault with something that has not happened, even though you know it is to happen, because it ain't happened yet. Because, Mr. Speaker, sir, there will always be certain things that will happen in the latter part of a term. That is the nature of life. The honourable member cannot get vexed with me because I don't have any grey hair. I will get it if I live long enough. It will come. And if it doesn't get grey, because it drops out. But it drops out because of the stress invoked by the member like the honourable member, who makes life a little bit too difficult sometimes, sir. And you know, if you want to have a debate on the substance of where we are and the differences, sir, because this legislation has gone, as I say, this has taken us to a new era of governance. You may not like everything about it, but accept, though, that it has done what was necessary by way of raising the bar.
Your honourable member has 2 more minutes.
And in those 2 minutes, sir, I want to talk to you a little bit about penalties. Penalties, sir, yes. You know that for conviction or indictment, a man who is indicted now for taking a bribe, sir, he stands to face a penalty of $1.5 million. Now, I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, sir, because though I thought I had done relatively well at the bar, I know that you are in the stellar company of those who have done the best at the bar.
Be careful what you say.
I don't want to tell your tales out of school, sir. But, sir, for me, and I suspect for most of us in this house, Mr. Speaker, sir, and for most of us who have passed through the house, a penalty of $1.5 million is a massive deterrent. So the legislation has created a deterrent for people in public life, whether you're a politician, whether you're a judge, whether you're a permanent secretary, whether you're whoever, Mr. Speaker, sir. And that is why I feel that equally there must be a similar weight being brought to bear on the private sector. Because don't fool yourself, Mr. Speaker, sir. There are people from the private sector who may feel tempted to say, boy, Mr. X come into politics from a humble background. I wonder if I could persuade him, because I see God ministry now. I wonder if I could persuade him that he could drive a BMW tomorrow when he was only driving a Suzuki yesterday. It can happen, Mr. Speaker, sir. Don't tell me not. I have seen in my 20 years a man that come here with a Suzuki driving a BMW. If you please, Mr. Speaker, sir. And you know, sir, I don't again registration number. I have seen some, Mr. Speaker, sir. I have seen some, sir. I have seen some who could not pay the rent where they live. Driving luxury car too. Owning big house. This legislation, Mr. Speaker, sir, speaks to evidence of unexplained property, obtaining an accretion of property which you cannot provide satisfactory account for. So these are the substantive things in the bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, that have carried us to a place where we never went before. I don't ask anybody in Barbados to treat this bill as though it is perfection, because I have never seen, and I practiced law in Barbados now for 24 years, I have never seen a perfect piece of legislation. I don't know that any such thing exists. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, compared to what we had yesterday, this, sir, takes us a long, long way down the road. And that, in the end of the day, is all you can ask of a government. That it responds to the cry of the public, it hears the demands of its electorate, and that, Mr. Speaker, sir, it has something objective to offer. So that when I next go into Kings Village in my constituency, and I butt up on Peter, who tell me, Simmons, y'all could get through, good boy, but I'm going to tell you, I'm sorry for you, I ain't voting unless I see a Prevention of Corruption Act, because when they stack up for one another, I can now look Peter in the eye and say, promise made, promise kept, Mr. Speaker, sir. I am obliged to you.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 3 p.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 3 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 3 p.m.